Tracing is good. It will help you become a better artist, and you should trace more, period. That is my pitch. That is my thesis statement for this video. So tracing kind of gets a bad rap because it's typically associated with just taking someone else's line work, and because you etched right over it, it's yours now and you can just use it, and then you go pass it off as your work, and then someone thinks that you are responsible for the style or the construction of that thing that you're showing them, when it's really a lot of another person's creative decisions went into it. And I think tracing still gets a bad rap when you trace photos, even when they're your own photos, when you've removed ownership from the equation entirely. If it's your own photo that you took and you made a hand gesture to try to put into a piece, and you're tracing over that hand gesture, who is anybody else to tell you that you can't do that? Do whatever you need to do to make the picture good without taking something from someone else. If you took the picture of your own hand, how is it bad? It does have the negative of not helping you create a hand on your own. So are you going to have to take a picture of your own hand every single time you want to draw a hand? You don't want to do that. You shouldn't want to do that. You shouldn't have to do that. There's a quicker way. It just takes time. If that's, it's kind of ironic, but part of the art journey is figuring out how to get to the point where you don't need certain tools and certain crutches as much. But in this video, I want to show you 2 ways in which tracing can be used to make you better in the long run, and not just in the short run of solving a problem that you're facing in the moment, but to help you solve more problems on your own in the future. So I've gotten this reference image from a Dorka stock. A lot of people probably recognize that name, or like her older name, Sinchi stock, from way back in the DeviantArt days. I've been drawing from her stuff for a really long time. This is their model, Danny. So I got this image. I thought it was just the perfect image to use for this video because it shows off a lot of musculature in a very engaging dynamic pose with pretty good lighting. So I went ahead and traced around the contour of mostly the upper body, because that's mainly what I'll be focusing on today. I used blue to trace over the silhouette of the body, and pink to sort of explore the muscle groups that I'm seeing. Now, I am not an expert in muscle groups. Everybody has a little bit to learn about muscle groups. A lot that I've learned from it has been from a YouTube channel called Proko. A lot of artists probably already know about it. If you haven't seen Proko, Proko, look them up on YouTube. I learned a lot from that channel. But I'm not really putting forth anything consciously that I already know about muscles into this video. I am working strictly from what I am tracing. I am just observing what I see on the image and tracing over the contours of it. And if I see a muscle group, if I see a lump on the side of the arm, or like one shape or bone or muscle overlapping another, I will just put it down on my picture with the contour there for later. I'm really just trying to break down anatomy, and that is a never-ending road that you're always going to be getting better and struggling at certain things in anatomy. Everyone's struggling with something in anatomy. Your favorite painter spent 7 times longer on a nose than they should have last week. I promise you. But the overall goal with this process is to break down what you're tracing into more simplistic shapes. And when you don't have to worry about proportion, you can spend more of your brain power thinking about how you want to break it down. Every artist has a different way of sketching, of doing gestures, of translating a blank canvas into a recognizable shape that looks like a human being. Sometimes it looks more like scribbles, sometimes it's really mathematical, sometimes it's fed by a lot of years of studying anatomy and the skeleton. Sometimes people are more cartoonish and they have ridiculously simple shapes and everyone's just made out of squares and tubes and triangles. I kind of fall in the middle of that and basing things on anatomy. And no matter what style you have, this is helpful because it's really important to be able to look at a reference of a human being and break it down into those simple shapes. Because even characters like John Arbuckle from Garfield, who is so far away from the actual anatomy of a human being, is still going to be doing human-like poses and expressions and expressing emotion to a camera, and you need to be able to have that character recognizably react in a way a human would. So even if you draw like Peanuts or anime, you're still going to benefit from studying from real humans and photorealistic reference. And the really fun part about this process is that everyone is going to come to a completely different way, or should I say, like, everyone's way of doing it will be unique. Everyone's way of breaking down a figure into smaller, easier to digest shapes is going to be different. And it's cool to see other artist sketches for that reason, to see the way they draw a twisting torso, or how they handle hands and the skin of the hand folding and overlapping as it does certain poses. I could probably learn a lot from just looking at how other artists draw feet. I am not good at drawing feet. And I would say especially when they're in shoes. Shoes completely elude me as of recording this video, and in years from now I might look back at this video and be like, oh dude, you're so good at shoes now. You actually cook right now at shoes, so don't worry about it. But the more you do this tracing process, breaking down a proportionally accurate human into simple shapes, the more you'll be ready to reorganize, exaggerate, and reuse those simple shapes when you're trying to do another gesture, because going from a blank canvas to a realistic human being, unless you're SpongeBob SquarePants, is very difficult. So it's helpful to have a system of shortcuts that you can fall back on to help you bridge the gap between image in your head and image on the paper that you're proud of. So when I said 2 methods to use tracing to get better at art, this is me slowly demonstrating the first one. When you have a drawing or painting or hell, an AI image, you are learning from a flawed source. More so AI than drawings, because there is at least human intent behind drawings, but humans are fallible. Humans can make mistakes, and everyone will make mistakes as they draw. If you want to copy another artist's style or technique, sure, you can definitely work on their, like try to remake their work if you want to. And if that sounds like kind of cringy to you, in the fine art world, they just call that a master study. It is not anything crazy or embarrassing or weird to do. If you have an artist on Blue Sky or Tumblr or something that you really like, and you just want to try to remake one of their pictures verbatim, I don't know, maybe don't post it. That's depending on the artist that you copied from. But if that's just how you're trying to get better at certain techniques, if you're saying, wow, this artist shades so well, I love the way that they make I love the way that this artist draws legs. They really understand like how thighs and knees work together. I want to copy that. I want to do it just like them. Then absolutely learn from their work. That is called a master study. You can trace it. You can just look at it. You can use it as reference. And a lot of the techniques with tracing are going to go hand in hand with reference. The part of the video I've moved on to now is just reference. I'm not tracing anymore. I am looking at what I already traced, and I'm trying to use what I made as reference. But the difference here is I'm not using an image as a reference. I'm using my own line work, which is, even if the line work is traced, you are using your own mark making as a reference, and now taking off the training wheels of previously you had the proportions down. It was off of a photo. You can't get the proportions wrong when you're tracing. You're tracing over the top of it. But when you can't see what you're tracing anymore, and you're just using your own marks as reference on a different paper, which is effectively what I've made with the lower half of this canvas, you are working from a reference that only has the information that you wanted to convey to yourself. Sometimes that really helps. And this is something that you're going to bounce back and forth between this method and the tracing with, or I should say bounce between this method, the tracing, and researching muscle groups. Because I promise you, if you're drawing a character, let's say if you are familiar with Cammy from Street Fighter, she, based on what she's wearing and what she does and how she fights, she's going to have her legs be really prominent in a lot of her pictures. She's going to be kicking people, sliding, doing handstands, having her feet in the air. And if you're watching a video, like on Proco, about how to draw legs or how thigh muscles and thigh bones are structured, you are going to let that information bleed into what you're drawing, and you're going to see a result. But if you tried to draw a leg now, just out of your head, and then tried to draw a leg while using a picture as reference, it's obviously going to get better. But just from personal experience, if you're trying to draw a leg while watching a video about how to draw legs, I felt like I had unlocked, my own Super Saiyan when I was watching breakdowns of anatomy while I was drawing. Because every time I had an aha moment or saw some way that they did something, I was like, oh, I gotta add that. That bump right there, that's where the bone comes out. That's where this part of the skin would overlap this. Oh my God, it looks so much better. It really is just internalizing research. You are looking, you're absorbing what you're seeing, and you're working on that hand-eye-mind coordination. So now I'm just redoing the tracing method, but I'm focusing more on breaking down the body into shapes that I find helpful to communicate anatomy. There's a lot of tubes and a lot of circles for joints because it communicates to me where things are going to go and lets me quickly see how wide and how long and how tapered certain parts are. Because a lot of getting anatomy correct is just figuring out where our limbs taper, where our joints are, where our bones stick out. And you can fudge a lot of it if you just figure out those simple landmarks of anatomy like that. And once you internalize what correct anatomy is, you are just free to exaggerate and stylize and break all the rules as much as you want. But that foundation really helps. And if I had to break down this entire segment into one lesson, it's this. The more you do this, the more you're going to figure out what kinds of shapes are helpful for you. You're not going to break down the body in the same way I am. You aren't going to pay attention to how certain parts of the anatomy looks or the way certain gestures read like I will. We're going to have different priorities and we are going to find different shapes helpful. I don't expect me or anybody else out there to draw anatomically realistic skeletons first and then build bodies on top of them. Don't think you have to do that. The important part is to create your own system of guidelines that helps you translate the rules of a realistic human being into a drawing. That's it. So the second technique that I wanted to talk about that will make you better, that's strictly based on tracing, is to divorce the concept of practicing anatomy from practicing rendering. A lot of times when I see people practicing rendering, they're doing a sketch and line work beforehand, or they're just looking at a reference and trying to paint it from eyesight. And I just don't think you have to do those things at the same time. You don't have to worry about getting proportions correct and worry about how to paint something, because even how to paint something is such a loaded term because it's so many different disciplines crammed together. It's your actual mark making, like how you treat your brush, how you blend, how you achieve the textures of the thing that you're looking at. It is color and how different colored light or environments affects something. It is the actual construction of the planes of the face and what parts of it are going to be hit by light and which parts aren't, which parts are going to be covering which other parts. You do not need to worry about all of this stuff if you're just trying to practice one of them. Use shortcuts to eliminate different parts of that equation. You don't need to practice proportion while you're practicing rendering. So just trace something. If you're going to have line work, trace it like I did right here. I just traced her entire face, where her eyes go, where her nose goes, where her lips go. And then you can even have the painting directly under it, because I'm not trying to learn proportion or drawing correctly or foreshortening right now. I'm not trying to. I just want to study like where the light is hitting her face, the relationships between the colors I'm putting down, because when you do a color study specifically, sometimes a color looks a lot different when it's on a canvas or in a picture than it is once you pick it up and start using it at a brush and you're like, wow, this is just gray. This is just gray. And your brain doesn't perceive it that way when you're looking at a picture. So for traditional and digital artists alike, color studies are really important, but I'll have to have a different video about color later, because that is a whole topic that I could talk about for half an hour. So right now I'm just color picking colors straight off of her face and putting them down to try and copy this photograph of her. while I'm doing this, I'm not just looking at pixels and saying, okay, this color goes here, this color goes here, this color goes here. I have to make those lines from the picture with my mouse. I say mouse, with my cursor, with my stylus. I'm not drawing with a mouse, I promise you. But I have to make those marks and those shapes and those forms myself. So I am studying how to paint a face, even though I'm tracing, even though I'm color picking directly from the model. I'm not trying to figure out what colors to pick right now. I'm not trying to figure out the distance between an eye and a nose right now. I could study that another time. Right now, I'm just trying to make a cool looking study and work on my rendering. And this wasn't that serious of a practice. This was for the video. I'm using a really small brush, and I actually really liked how my texture of my brush was working. It's just this silly little pencil brush. It's nothing fancy. But as I was scribbling, it kind of gave me this pixel art feel. I don't know. I might do something with that later. But that's the kind of stuff you stumble into, I guess, when you experiment. But yes, some of the things that I learned from this that I wasn't intending to learn was how surprisingly gray a light can be. The fact that her skin is this rich caramel color, but then the light is just gray, but it doesn't read like gray. It reads like she is being hit by a light source. Your brain does weird things with color, but it's really cool. I picked up specific parts of the face that tend to grab speculars, highlights. Right at the top of the bridge of her nose, where it meets her forehead, has a nice focused highlight. And the tip of her nose has a nice focused highlight. I exaggerated a little bit because it looks cool. The plane underneath the eye on our right side, her left eye, catches some of that gray light from the side. And I like how that gets caught and shows the third dimension of her eye in its socket and how the skin around it kind of comes out and catches the light from underneath as opposed to just being concave. So you've watched the video now and you're thinking, okay, now this actually seems fun. I've had tracing demystified and unvillainized for myself. What do I do now? How do I use this to help me in my next drawing? Well, if you plan a drawing, let's say you do a sketch, a gesture, and you want to have a character throwing a discus. I don't know, maybe you do. This is obviously much more general art advice, but I'm going to inject the tracing thing in the middle. Obviously you want to do a sketch of like what kind of, is it going to be a low angle? Is it going to be a high angle? It's going to also change based on the build of your character and even if they're humanoid in general. Let's just go for a normal human being right now. So just like you would if you were just looking for a reference to paint from, find a reference of a person throwing a discus. I apologize sincerely to all people who throw discuses if I am not saying it correctly or if I'm using the wrong term. Find multiple references of discus throwers. There's a ton of them out there. You could just use Google. It doesn't really matter what you use. And of course, this isn't gonna become your final piece. Don't worry about copyright. Don't worry about stealing from people. This is just to help you grow. This is not gonna become your final image. But do these exercises on those images. Trace out the contours of their body as they do these poses. Break down their bodies into simpler shapes. Figure out which shapes work for you. If you are seeing the torso as a square, if you're seeing the rib cage or the arms and you want to do more curvy lines, whatever way you want to draw is going to shine through a lot with which kind of shapes stick out to you in the anatomy and in the references that you picked. But once you finish doing that trace, turn the reference off and try to redraw that same exact pose or those same poses again without looking at the reference, without looking at the original photo, but use your trace as a reference. Then you can take these lines you've already made and play with them. Hell, grab the lasso tool, use the transform, whatever you need to do, whatever program you're working in, exaggerate it, redraw it as many times as you need to remember and kind of beat those forms into your mind. Because you know for a fact, because you traced that original sketch, that this is going to have true human acting and gesture behind it. If you want to get some bonus points, watch some videos of people throwing discus watch some anatomy videos on YouTube or whatever site you use, whatever site exists when you're listening to this video. You don't have to be able to name all of the muscles in the arm off the top of your head, but as a visual artist, you should at least eventually be able to picture most of them. I don't care if you know what a pectoral is, but at the end of the day, you should be able to draw a dang good chest muscle. And if you need to, take those original traces that you did of the discus throwers and try to render the shadows of the muscles and of the arm as they throw it, because once you get to coloring your actual finished drawing from your reference, you'll have a baseline on where to put the shadows. And if you want to even rotate your sketch into a different pose, well, if you've internalized the construction of the anatomy well enough and the location of the shadows well enough, you might even be able to translate those in your head as you rotate that model and as you draw it in different poses. If you want to raise the arm or bend the elbow more or do it from a low angle, you are a lot more equipped to do that now. So I hope all that made sense. I am a huge supporter of using tracing to improve your skills. Don't go out there pretend other people's art is yours, but like I said, use this to your advantage. Use this to get better. Use this to grow. If the next time I drew a person jumping in the air and pirouetting or whatever the model was doing, the next time you draw your discus thrower, you will be better. So the results are obvious. And in the future, once you've drawn 100 discus throwers and you've drawn an entire webcomic about Olympic athletes, you're going to remember that trace that you did of that first discus thrower. You're going to look back at it and say, oh, I drew that big muscle on the arm too big. And you might know that it's a bicep or a deltoid, but who knows? Doesn't matter. What matters is you drew it and it looks good. So anyway, thanks for listening to this video. I'll be back next week. I'm going to try to post every Thursday. I'm going to do another design twist next week. So thanks for watching. Peace.